Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 2 on the European way of growth, policy for resilient and globally competitive European Union. The conference is held within the program of the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union. How are you, ladies and gentlemen? I'm looking at your smiling faces. Well, it took us some time to gather here. I thought that perhaps someone would choose to stay at the hotel after our evening last night. But it looks like the strongest, the most resilient have made it here to the conference room. I'm looking forward to our work together today on day 2, as it's a conference on development, referring to the exercise we had yesterday. In the morning, I have yet another exercise. We take another step forward. I'm going to need your involvement again. Today maybe a bit more, but it's going to be quite short, I promise. Could you please, at the beginning, stand up for a while? Stand up, please. So some morning exercise at the same time. Excellent. Thank you very much. You're in a very good shape. And now, I have for you the following task. Please forget for a moment about all the official titles we have here. Scientific titles and political titles, our professional titles. Try to show a smile to your friends, everyone, to 2 people at least, to please show your smile appreciation. But I suggest to people you don't know, look left to right, back to the front. You can smile, you can nod your hands, you can say something nice. Let's begin now.
Jak sobie Państwo...
So, once you're done, you can sit down again.
Tak sobie dzisiaj o tym myślałem, nie wiem jakie jest Wasze do tego podejście. Myślę, że my często szukamy...
Sometimes we look for some magical, very complicated ideas for overcoming barriers between us, trying to communicate, find common solutions. But I think the best ideas are in the most simple things, just like that. So I encourage everyone again to work together and remember about smiling, looking at one another, saying something nice, and then our life becomes easier. We are all well aware of that. I'm looking to day 2 of our excellent work together, and we've got the following agenda ahead of us. 3 introductory interventions, and panel 1, parallel panels, and another panel discussion here with the closing session at the end. Secretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy, Mr. Jan Szyszko, first speaker. Let us have some applause to encourage our speakers.
Dzień dobry, muszę powiedzieć, że...
Good morning. From this perspective, this conference room is even more impressive than from the other side, from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second day of our Kraków conference. I am delighted to be able to open our discussions, our debates on the second day. I wish to welcome ministers, present in the room, members of parliaments, representatives of EU institutions, national institutions, local government institutions. I welcome all experts from different research centers, universities, NGOs. I'm delighted to have you here, ladies and gentlemen. Just like we're roughly halfway through the EU budget, which is a good time perhaps to have some attempts to reflect and sum up about what has been achieved. It's also here. We are halfway through, roughly, through our conference. It's a good time, perhaps, to stress the main conclusions from our discussions. Yesterday, many courageous words, but also some words that mentioned some shortcomings of Europe as it is today. Marshal Hołownia said last morning that Europe is great. We don't have to follow others. Europe is a big and proud continent, but it needs bigger investments. Logical, not ideological. The way towards clean energy should not lead, not taking into account the needs of the poorest. Minister Pocińska spoke about two scenarios for the development of Europe of stagnation and Europe of competitiveness. She suggested for also new sources of own income, possible perhaps digital taxes or taxes on foreign tourists arriving to the EU, just like similar solutions are present in the USA or the UK. She also asked, well, the recovery fund, should it truly be a one-off event? Maybe not. Minister Selinga, responsible for the recovery fund in the European Commission, spoke about inspirations for the new recovery policy, bringing together reforms, investments. So she spoke about the approach, so-called performance-based approach. Madame Christofidiou and Commissioner Vice President of the Commission, Rafael Fito, they spoke about the cohesion policy as a foundation for the development of Europe. It builds European competitiveness already now, and it's going to perhaps do it even better and faster in the future. Poland, as you know, moving from one EU budget to another one, from one financial perspective to another one, we are moving or paying even more funds to the local government. We started with 20%, now we are at the level of over 40% of funds directed to local government. And it's true that we are perhaps one of the best, maybe even best, taking into account macroeconomic results of, how shall I put it, well, the Polish, if I can put it like that, the Polish model of development, which is based on co-management, on sharing responsibilities, sharing decision-making process about the most important decisions in the country. And we've got excellent results here in this country. For this reason, we would like to inspire others in the EU with our development model. We know that regionalization and decentralization are more efficient, are better than centralization. They can lead to excellent end results. As we want to inspire others, we also remain open, of course, to new solutions. We know that we as Europe need to compete as equals with the EU, USA or China, which was perhaps not the case over the last decade. We have to tap the potential of all 450 million EU citizens living in our union. Moving towards competitiveness is not only about investing into the most developed regions and those living in the regions where the largest companies have their headquarters. We have to think about the development of SMEs, and the economy of the Central Europe is very much based on SMEs, so that those small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe have a chance to become big European corporations that perhaps in future will also stand for European competitiveness in the world. Over the last decade, the crises we have experienced in Europe, they are becoming more and more urgent and even more destructive. At the same time, the geographical intensity of their occurrence is not exactly the same all over Europe. Some countries are doing more, trying to overcome problems on the labor market or to bridge the gap in pay for men and women. Others have to focus on the seniors, the senior generation. The south of our continent is trying to meet the challenge of the migration crisis. It's basically located along the front line of this crisis. At the same time, the east of the European Union, starting from Finland down to Poland and Romania, is dealing with the different actions of the dictatorships that we are bordering on to the east. And we make it very clear that we have to wake up to the motto of our presidency, security, Europe. Managing development policies at those difficult times requires a very individual approach so that we can tap the potential of all our regions. We need a territorial approach. For this reason, we believe that the new cohesion policy and the new policy for the development of the EU should perhaps come up with a larger portfolio of priorities. All of them should have key importance for the EU. They should all build our European competitiveness, green transformation, digitization, the defense sector, security industry. We believe that it might be a good idea so that the member states and regions would be able to select those priorities that they consider for them most beneficial, best for increasing their competitiveness. We might have different solutions for the Podlasia region in Poland, something different from Andalusia, but the objective is exactly the same, competitiveness. Europe needs big, well-thought-out investments, cheap energy and security. We have two milestones that we need to think about here. First of all, the midterm review I referred to in the introduction to my presentation. It's a time, I think, to be ambitious about this review, to consider whether the priorities that we came up with in 2019 are truly and fully satisfactory for us and good for our competitiveness today in our reality in 2025. We are very much open to such a discussion, and we will be making concrete proposals for changes there that perhaps earlier were not part of our discourse. This is what we also mentioned yesterday. The second step are negotiations about the new cohesion policy, the new architecture of the EU funds, what we will be doing after 2027. Here I wish to stress yet again the points that were made here on stage yesterday. It is not enough to invest in a more flexible and better way if we want to be competitive, to compete with China, the USA. We need to invest even more. We need to have more funds to invest, we as Europe. We have to build our security, our independence, our welfare, better life quality, using even more significant funds. Just like in the history of the biggest initiatives in the EU, which is an excellent example of a development program and peaceful development program in the world, perhaps the best example, the EU. Here we have to simply be ambitious and realistic about what we can do, remembering, of course, about the need for compromise. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish for you very fruitful discussions here, very interesting debates, and hopefully you're going to spend good time here in Krakow. Thank you very much.
Dziękujemy serdecznie.
Thank you very much, Jan Szyszko. And now I'd like to ask the Undersecretary of State and the Chancellor of the Prime Minister in Poland, Magdalena Sobkowiak-Czarnecka.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Being in this kind of mood that we had at the very beginning to try to move up and wake up the room, we decided that we will switch the languages. Jan was speaking in Polish and I'll be speaking in English, maybe to wake you up and to do some things with the interpreter equipment that you have in your ear. It always works to wake you up. And it's always a challenge to be a speaker after marvelous dinner and also in a competition with beautiful Krakow. So I'm very happy, very proud that you decided to spend this morning with us together on the conference. And when I saw yesterday pictures from this conference, my first thought, maybe not very sophisticated, was, wow, I'm very impressed with the conference. Congratulations to Minister Pełczyńska-Nałęcz and one and only Jan Szyszko for the idea and organizing the conference in the line of the main thoughts of Polish presidency. You know that the main motto of Polish presidency is security first, but also this is a presidency based on dialogue. This is why also I am very glad that here in this room we have people coming from government, from regional governments, from institutions, but also from NGOs, from the world of science. So we have very different groups. Already the preparations for the presidency were made in this sort of dialogue. We had a special group, NGOs, working on the program of presidency. We established special council of entrepreneurs who were also working on the program of the presidency. And keeping this spirit, we decided also to organize 7 big conferences like this one is the first one, to really gather the most important people, not only from institutions, not only from the governments, because we in the governments and our friends in the institutions are not the only one to have ideas. We need to discuss those ideas with you, people working on the ground, especially in terms of cohesion. And when I'm thinking about cohesion, in terms of the main motto of Polish presidency, Security Europe, I'm thinking that there is no security without dialogue, there is no security without democracy, there's no security without strong regions, and there's no security with equal chances. And those 4 nouns, they are about cohesion. So the cohesion policy is the core of European values and also is the core to keep Europe secure. We as a Polish government, but also as a Polish presidency, in our priorities, we said that we will focus a lot to give the cohesion policy in the hands of regions. Who better understands the needs on the ground than regional governments, than NGOs, than people who are working on the ground in those small communities? Not everybody in Brussels knows what is needed in the regions. Even not everybody in the governments know what is needed in the region. Especially that we are living in the times that we are facing really huge challenges. We have war going on, which is a result of Russian aggression on Ukraine. This is a war that we have next door to Poland. It is a neighborhood country to Poland. We are in the middle of digital transformation, which is this digital world is everyday life for youngsters. But we have still some people excluded from digital transformation, especially the silver generation. Another challenge is green transformation. And we always think, as a government and as the presidency, that the green transition should be just and should not give any bad impact on society. Nobody can be left behind, only because of the idea of green transition. And another challenge is about demography. We are getting older in Europe. We are facing also the challenge of migration. And facing all those challenges, there's no better way to tackle with those challenges than being together and working together. Also, I think that the key to a just transformation and to equal chances in Europe is also lowering the burdens and not exclude anybody from getting European money only because of the complexity and sophisticated procedures. Those procedures should be easier than they are now, that the money should be reachable not only for people who already have money and have money for advisors, for special people who are writing all those papers that you need to get money, but it should be reachable for everybody who actually needs. This is about equal chances. And always the lowest chances are for the regions, for the communities who have less money. And we should do everything to make those procedures easier and also to reach to those people how to help them to get European money. Cohesion policy is also about cooperating between the regions. And this is the real strength of Europe. I think at this moment, everybody understands in Europe that there's no security, you cannot feel secure without being competitive. And also, I think that we already realized that no member state alone could be competitive on the global market. If we compare us to US, China, India, we need to act together as Europe. And to act together, we should have also a strong cooperation between the regions. And this is also one of the goals of Polish presidency. I started with being in a dialogue, and I want to also sum up about being in the dialogue. Getting ideas from you, discussing the ideas, is the core of European values. But there should be one difference. We should act faster. We cannot spend months, years on writing reports, on discussion, and ending with nothing. We should act now. The world is not waiting for us. The world is already running straight forward, and we need to do the same. I'm very happy that I was invited here to be with you in Krakow. I wish you a very good day with very fruitful discussions. We as a presidency and as a government, we are waiting for the results of those discussions, the ideas that came up here in Krakow. And remember, security Europe. Thank you very much.
Magdalena Sobkowiak-Czarnecka, dziękujemy bardzo serdecznie.
Magdalena Sobkowiak-Czarnecka, thank you very much. I invite to the stage Mr. Jacek Protas, MEP. And a round of applause, please, again.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Długa droga.
Good morning. Quite a long road to cover to reach this podium, this rostrum. I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to this very important and prestigious event. Thank you very much, Minister, dear Janek. I'm so happy that we meet during the Polish presidency in Kraków to discuss very important, very significant matters. The Polish presidency is the time of significant and major debates, discussions, but also very important decisions that will result not only tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, but primarily after 2027 with just results. Because today we're speaking not only of the future of the cohesion policy. In this week, I presented to the Regional Development Commission opinions concerning the future of the cohesion policy to be approved by the European Parliament in May. But it's also a discussion about the long-term financial framework. And here, Tavares and Muresan MPs presented this week also draft opinions that will be approved in May. All that is accompanied by the new challenges that the EU is facing. I don't know whether in the history of one Europe, joint Europe, united Europe, we've ever lived in such a complex situation, a situation as complex as today. War in Europe, the need and necessity to build powerful defense industry, the need to defend the borders, to get ready for the potential military confrontation, the need to protect the borders, because we are fully aware that there is a hybrid war waged against Europe. We know it from the Polish-Belarusian border, but just several years ago we had the European borders opened when crossing Turkey, were whole throngs of people escaping. Also the need to reinforce competitiveness, the competitive edge, because the EU is beyond doubt a superpower, but it's losing markets from year to year, and our share of the global GDP is dropping, and that tendency is a reason for major concern. Europe has to wake up. Europe has to define new ambitious goals. Moreover, on top of that, last week, that was encouraged by Prime Minister Donald Tusk during his address in Strasbourg at a plenary session of the European Parliament. That address was really perfectly well received, obviously, of the progressive forces supporting European, because in the Parliament we have the extremities that you know perfectly well of. Let me focus on cohesion policy that I'm working on. I've been working on it for many years, beginning with the position of a beneficiary, then as a marshal of the implementing authority, now in the then in the ministry in the Parliament, and also now in the European Parliament. Today is the first college of commissioners that is starting work on a new long-term financial perspective. It's very important information and a very important moment for the whole Europe, but especially for the whole country as the beneficiary of the cohesion policy. Obviously, we have to be an active participant in the discussion, in both the Polish government and also our parliamentarians, MEPs especially, but also the various organizations of self-government, Committee of the Regions notably, participate actively in that discussion. The cohesion policy cannot be a victim of the new challenges. It is so as we have recently seen that difficult tendency. If anything happens, fires in Portugal, flooding in Europe, take money from the cohesion policy and react. The Solidarity Fund, EU Solidarity Fund, is like this. It's practically not there. The fund that should should react to such events. Cohesion policy is there and should be the largest instrument for EU investments. 13% of all the investments in the EU result from the cohesion policy. They stem from that policy. In Poland, I believe that this ratio is higher. Local governments run 2/3 of public investments. Lion's share of those is co-financed by the European funds. Convergence, that's equalization of opportunities between countries and regions, is ensconced in the treaties, so we cannot give those up because the developmental differences between regions are overwhelming, and often, unfortunately, they go on increasing. According to the 9th cohesion report, in 1995, the countries of Central Europe produced 43% of were at the level of 43% of average GDP in the European Union. Today, it's 80%. This is the fruit of cohesion policy. Until the end of 2022, Tens of millions of entrepreneurs received support, 300,000 new jobs opened, 140 billion euro for energy transformation and digital transformation. Also, this cohesion policy efficiently reacted to new challenges and various events, to mention COVID, war, and the migration crisis. But to all of that, as the minister rightly mentioned, this ambitious EU policy needs and requires funds. Today, the discussion continues about the sources of those funds. There are two sources, either increasing the so-called own resources of the EU, briefly speaking, like with the RRF instrument, we made financial liabilities for the first time. It was the first time that the EU made those. Well, in the same way, probably we will have to do it with the new tasks, with the new challenges, or we will increase the membership fee, what becomes part of the EU's joint budget. The discussion continues. Perhaps we will have to use both the sources if we want to be ambitious. And then the discussion, ladies and gentlemen, very important for us, what model for our implementation? Really, do we want a model based on reforms, on results, as it's now being discussed or rumored? But then that model is absolutely centralized, or we try to build a new model that will take up everything that is the best from the experience of cohesion policy, but will also be based on tasks and results. We in for very important discussion. To us, centralization of the cohesion policy would be something absolutely unacceptable, I'd say. And I hope and I believe that we will successfully defend what we have won through cohesion policy and also make it remain a powerful instrument in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I encourage you to. I'm so happy that there are so many of us here in Kraków and that we discuss those really important matters. I encourage that in the coming weeks and months you are highly active. You representatives of various organizations in Poland and also in Europe. You representatives of governments, self-governments at all the levels. We've got to join this discussion to work out the best possible model. Decisions will come soon. Projects will come while our presidency still lasts. Decisions possibly in the autumn during the Danish presidency, but that's really at the threshold. It's really imminent and coming. I wish you a fruitful time and good results of our joint work. Jacek Protas, thank you very much. We're now moving slowly to the first discussion panel. I'd like to ask you to get your mobiles ready. They'll be useful again. We'll be using Mentimeter. In a moment, we should see all the necessary information. As I told you yesterday, you can use your QR code and enter menti.com this way, or add menti.com and enter the code 1457 6761. We will be asking you questions, but I know from Professor John Bachtler there will also be space to ask your own questions. That's what the professor is going to tell us in a moment. Now, to tell you what this discussion panel is about, we have prepared a video.
Podejście terytorialne w politykach rozwoju.
Territorial approach in developmental policy in the context of global trends and future challenges.
Polityka spójności Unii Europejskiej oferuje wsparcie wobec wyzwań globalnych, regionalnych i lokalnych, takich jak depopulacja, migracje, zmiany klimatu, transformacja energetyczna, cyfryzacja i innowacje technologiczne oraz kryzysy geopolityczne i zdrowotne. Wyzwania te zmieniają kierunki rozwoju poszczególnych obszarów, stymulując jednocześnie budowanie ich odporności. Skala wpływu tych wyzwań oraz odpowiedzi terytoriów na nie jest zróżnicowana. Państwa i regiony Unii Europejskiej na bieżąco podejmują wysiłki na rzecz mitygacji negatywnych aspektów tych zmian oraz wzmacniają potencjały krajowe, regionalne i lokalne, wykorzystując środki polityki spójności na rzecz inwestycji i reform. Planując i realizując te przedsięwzięcia, należy uwzględniać specyficzne potrzeby i uwarunkowania różnych terytoriów. To klucz dla długofalowego oddziaływania polityki spójności na różnorakie obszary i do wzrostu poziomu życia mieszkańców Unii Europejskiej. Współpracując na wielu poziomach zarządzania unijnym, krajowym, regionalnym i lokalnym, jesteśmy w stanie efektywnie kształtować naszą wspólną przyszłość.
Zgodnie z tym, co już pojawiło się w tym materiale filmowym, panel nosi tytuł
This is the territorial approach panel in the context of global trends and challenges. It will be held in English. You can use the headsets. There is interpretation ensured.
Research Center, University of Strathclyde, Glasgow. I've met Professor yesterday at the gala dinner. He's super professional, super kind, so for sure you are in very good hands. I would like to invite you to the stage. A Państwa oczywiście poprosimy o brawa.
And of course we ask you to give a round of applause to Professor Bachtler.
John, the stage is yours. Have a nice time.
Dzień dobry and good morning everyone, and a very warm welcome to this second plenary panel session. And thank you, Martin, for that daunting introduction. As I said, I am a professor in the European Policies Research Centre at Strathclyde University in Glasgow and Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. As you saw on the film just now, our focus is on the territorial approach of development policies in a very challenging context. And you saw the kind of issues that the EU has to face in the film. But Minister Šiško, I think, picked out two important watchwords that encapsulate the political and policy context. One is ambition, the need to develop an ambitious response to these kind of challenges, but also realism in terms of the constraints that face the EU. Now, we hope to explore some of the challenges and opportunities in this panel session, which will then be developed further in the parallel sessions after the plenary. To assist us in this task, we have 5 very distinguished panelists representing different levels of policy making and policy analysis. And I'd like to invite each of them to join me on stage, and please give them a round of applause as they come up. Starting with Ms. Mercedes Caballero Fernandez, who's Secretary General for European Funds. Would you like to come and join us? Ms. Caballero is responsible for the budgetary relations with the EU, including the direction and coordination of the Spanish position in the MFF, the management of European funds, cohesion policy, and regional economic policy. Thank you very much. Could I invite Mr. Krzysztof Bolesta, Secretary of State in the Ministry of Climate and Environment here in Poland. Let's come and join us. Mr. Bolesta has long experience in Warsaw, but also in Brussels in terms going back to the accession negotiations and Poland's alignment with EU requirements in the areas of energy and research and development. Thank you very much. Could I invite Mr. Nicola de Michaelis, who is Deputy Director General in the Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy, DG Regio, in the European Commission. And could I invite Mr. Andrés Rodríguez Posé? Andrés. He is Professor of Economic Geography at the London School of Economics and was Chair of the High-Level Group on the Future of Cohesion Policy, which published its report just 1 year ago. And last but not least, could I invite Mr. Jan Olbricht? Jan Olbricht, as I'm sure all of you know, has a long career in public service, serving at different levels of government. Among many positions, he was Mayor of Szczecin, Marshal of the Voivodeship of Silesia, and MEP in the European Parliament for 4 terms, including in the budget and Reggie. Okay, before we start, just another reminder that you're able to send in questions at any time via the Menti platform that you just saw. You don't need to wait until we come to the discussion round. If something occurs to you while the panelists are speaking, then fire off your question. And we have colleagues from the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy who will be collating them and selecting them for the second round of discussion later on. Let me now turn to the subject matter of this session, and there are 2 broad sets of issues that we would like to discuss. One of them is how to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of development policies, in particular EU cohesion policy, in the face of the challenges and trends that we've just heard about. How to get better exploitation of the potential of different types of regions and places, including towns, cities, and rural areas. A second issue is how to strengthen the territorial dimension of both European and national policies, to get more place-based intervention, better policy coordination, and enhanced multi-level governance. So our plan for this session is to have a first round of interventions from our panelists. Each of them has been asked to address a specific question. Then we'll open things up, and using Menti, we'll put 3 questions on screen, 3 policy challenges with a number of policy options. There'll be an opportunity for you to assess what you think of these different options. We'll then go back to the panel and get their reaction to the results and also any questions that have been posed on Menti. We'll then draw things to a close, and hopefully this will set the scene very nicely for the parallel workshop sessions. Okay, let's now explore the issues in terms of territorial development policies. As I said, we have given each of our panelists a specific question and about 5 minutes or so to present their thoughts. And Ms. Caballero, perhaps I could ask you to start. How would you like to see the territorial dimension of EU cohesion policy strengthened?
Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this interesting debate that we have during these 2 days. Let me give some introductory ideas just to try to do a framework to the question. First of all, territorial development is development, and development is growth. So this is the first idea that is going just to be the framework for the rest. The second one, challenges, we are scared about the geopolitical situation, about how are we seeing in the world. Let me remember to all of us that Europe has gone through many dilemmas in its history. And the solution has always been the same: more integration. There is no other way to the dilemma, no one. So we have to be together. We know how to tackle the problems, but we need more cooperation, that's for sure. Also coming from the region. And the third one is that citizens should be always in the center. We cannot think of Europe without thinking of European citizens. That's, for me, the main three ideas to have the framework of the rest of the answers. I would like to emphasize that cohesion policy is a history, a story and a history of succeed, first of all. And it's a story of succeed because it has helped many countries, also mine, to grow. It has been a solution. It has been convergence, it has been solidarity, but not only solidarity. It has been counterbalance in a situation of a single market and its effect, and of a single currency. So it's much more than solidarity. It is, of course, but it is more than that. And cohesion policy, it has always had regions in the core. And this is extremely important, especially for my country. In Europe, the weight of regions is not the same as in other parts of the world. And this is for culture, for languages, for historical reasons, maybe for our way of life, even for the process of building a welfare state where the state has to be close to the citizens to be able to provide them with some services. And that's why regions have been always in the core. And I think this is something we cannot lose because it could be inefficient. Many of the functions that in different states, I know mine, but there are many others, but many of the functions that the state develops in many countries are carried out by the regions. So we cannot forget the regions. They are in the center, for sure. On top of that, we have this debate about how to foster development coming from the regions. If we have to choose between capacity of adoption, competitiveness, or traditional cohesion. And honestly, I think this is a false debate. There is no such a contradiction. We had the COVID, and how can we start or promote growth if we don't stabilize first the economic and social situation? It's impossible. You cannot do traditional policy, cohesion policy. How? You have first to stabilize the productive system, and then you can apply the traditional role of cohesion policy. Now we have the issue of competitiveness. Of course, competitiveness has to be an instrument to promote growth. So cohesion and competitiveness are not the opposite. The question is how to organize resources to have convergence. This is our affair, I'm sure of that. How to organize all these resources to be sure that we don't leave behind some of the regions. And the solution to the capacity of adaptation has to be there because we are going to have to tackle many other issues, and we cannot lose this kind of solution. For example, the RRF for my country has been a really good solution because after the COVID, we were really impacted by the pandemic, and now if we look at the macro figures, we are really doing well in this moment, taking into account the rate of growth, the rate of unemployment that has decreased a lot. So don't lose this opportunity. And let's go specifically to the challenges that territories have to tackle in this global context. The global challenge is mainly geographical and is geopolitical, and is, of course, about competitiveness and technology. But each region has a different starting point. Some of them has border problems with the neighborhood, for example, because they are in the border of a war. Others has demographic problems. Others have climate problem. Others have education problem, historical, political. So the starting point is very different, and that's why the solution cannot be an only solution for everyone. The place-based approach is really a need, and we have to be able to simplify this solution. For example, if I look at in my country, we have 19 regions. Indeed, there are 17 regions and 2 autonomous cities, Ceuta and Melilla, that are in the north of Africa, and all of them are divided through the 3 categories of regions, having 5 like less developed regions. We have 9 as transition regions, and 5 are as more developed regions. Solutions for all of them are very different. But of course, as EU, need to have global objective that we have to share. But the way to arrive there could be different. And which are these objectives nowadays? To be able to have strategic autonomy, of course, in this world, to be able to attract talent, educated people, and hence very good investment, and energy, of course, digitalization, decarbonization, all that are the challenges. But the approach could be different for each region. So I emphasize the idea of the place-based approach, because it's not the same a less developed region of a rural area in my country because it was never industrialized, or a decarbonized area because it was polluted in a previous time, because it has some industrial system, has nothing to do. And just one last point that I'm sure that is very common for all of us. One of the main challenges for the future, for cohesion policy, or for development policies in Europe is management. The challenge sometimes is management. And sometimes we talk about lack of administrative capacity. And I disagree. I think that we sometimes do not have lack of administrative capacity. We have overlapping administrative capacity. In this moment, we have 3 models: national budget and the way of proceeding with national budget. Then we have RRF system, and then we have cohesion policy system. 3 different systems for one single administration. Regional, local, lack of administrative capacity. We are really strong to be able to do that. So I don't think we have sometimes lack of administrative capacity. The question is that, and I think of less developed regions, if they have to absorb and to use the money in an efficient way, and on top of that, we ask them to have 3 different administrative systems overlapping, we are just putting a great burden on them that is inefficient. Maybe for the future, we should think of how, because I understand the need to preserve the protection of the interest of the union. I understand that. This is public money, of course. But we have to think maybe about how to harmonize some minimum principle in all the system to trust national system. Otherwise, this is going to be a challenge without any need. Thank you so much for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Caballero, for that opening contribution. Some really clear messages coming through there about how cohesion underpins growth, underpins stability, the importance of the regions, not just for the sake of some sort of abstract multi-level governance principle, but essentially because regions are so diverse and we need region-specific solutions, that competitiveness and cohesion are synergistic, symbiotic, that shouldn't be seen in opposition to each other. And the last point about the importance of capacity and how we think about the management underpinning what we want to achieve. You mentioned decarbonization as one of the key challenges, and that links very nicely to our second panelist, Krzysztof Bolesta. And given your experience, I wonder how you see at this time cohesion policy contributing to accelerating the green transition in very diverse EU regions.
Thank you for that. And I have to tell you that I'm really impressed with the venue as well. And I'm also impressed with you because this is probably the biggest audience cohesion policy topics have ever seen. My first thought when I saw, there'll be a conference, presidency conference on cohesion funds in Krakow, I thought we'll be speaking to the empty seats and you'll be all visiting the city, which is very beautiful, but hopefully you have this weekend for this. I think it's also one fun fact for you that this conference center has been funded in around 20% from cohesion funds. So that's also showing you how big impact the cohesion fund can have. But in my area, in energy and climate, the travel Poland has experienced over the last years has been amazing, if not great. People in Brussels and in many places around Europe still perceive Poland as the coal man of Europe. They think we have breakfast with coal and we eat pierogi with coal and everything. Actually, Poland has been growing in terms of PV, so photovoltaics, as one of the biggest markets in Europe. Heat pumps has been, for the recent years, one of the biggest markets in Europe. Also, producers of heat pumps have been coming to Poland to manufacture the installations. Now, if you look at figures, around 20 gigawatts of installed capacities PV. We have 1.5 million prosumers, so small installations being producers of electricity and consumers at the same time. And all this has been funded from cohesion money, or most of it. So this transition that we are undergoing has been fueled by European money. When I was leaving to Brussels, Poland was dependent on coal for electricity generation in around 90%. For the last data for last year is around 60%. So 30 percentage points over just decade is an immense, immense progress. And all this fueled by European money again. So it's been a success story, and we need to see to that it continues in this way, because there is not enough funds domestically for this huge challenge, which is energy transition.
Thank you very much.
I can go on forever, but I think
Thank you very much for sticking to the request in terms of a brief introduction, but really important points in terms of encapsulating two aspects of the green transition. One is a huge success in terms of moving away from fossil fuels and coal, but also on the other side in terms of the investment in leading edge technology. So thank you very much for that. The importance of sort of climate and environment policy raises the question of sort of policy coordination between different areas of EU policy, of national policy, and so on. And for that, to deal with that issue, can I turn to Nicola de Michaelis? From your point of view, coordination is something that we discuss a lot of. We have different degrees of experience in terms of policy coordination, policy synergies at different levels. how do you see that we could enhance, looking forward, how do you see we can enhance coordination both vertically and horizontally?
Thank you, John, and good morning. When I started this job a few years ago, somebody told me that one of the characteristics of cohesion policy is a permanent tension between European priorities, national concern, and local and regional specificity and needs. And this has characterized the conversation between the Union and the member states and the regions. And there is a widespread perception that the balance shifted squarely toward regions and member states over the past few years, and the Commission is less and less capable of influencing the way in which resources are used. And it's not by accident, in fact, that if you think about it, that all the major policy documents that are prepared, not last the competitiveness compass, do not mention cohesion policy, despite the fact that the policy represents a third of the European budget. The second reflection before responding to your question is that we are, as you know, we are entering a bloody discussion on the European budget. The pressure on the European budget would be gigantic because of the looming forthcoming enlargement, because of new priorities, because of the repayment of the money that the Europe has contracted on financial markets to finance the RRF and so on, which means that unless the European institutions come up with a genuine own resources, the budget will be under significant pressure. And therefore, there will be a need to be much more focused and targeted. I'm saying all this because, and this I respond to your question, because yes, there is a need, and this is the discussion that is happening and will influence and inform the discussion on the next budget on how to realign those European priorities, national concern, and regional and local needs. And I think that we need to, therefore, to reflect what will be, it can be the instrument to do precisely that. Is going to be the European semester, a profoundly reformed European semester with a stronger medium-term perspective, bringing together national and European resources and identifying what are the key missions or priorities that cohesion policy should finance. Is something else? I don't know. But it's clear that we need to be aware that the margins of freedom and maneuver that the policy still has, let's face it, I think we need to be honest among us, that still exist in the way in which the resources are used as to change. And you heard, not only in the future, but you heard the EVP yesterday, already now. And I think that the message that the EVP passed yesterday is that the midterm review is precisely an opportunity to show that the policy can respond to emerging priorities. And therefore, reestablishing that link that has been weakened over the past years between those priorities and the way in which a national frameworks translate those priorities and are then translated into investment at the local level.
Thanks very much for that. I mean, I think you started very much by focusing on the realism side of what Minister Šiško was talking about, and particularly what you call the bloody MFF debate ahead. I mean, if we look at the competitiveness compass document that came out 2 days ago, focusing very much on innovation, decarbonization, security, it looked like there was a line on cohesion policy that had been added at the last moment as a sop, if you like, to cohesion policy interest. But in this new, potentially this new MFF structure and shape that emerges with a strategic framework at European level, the question is, how is that going to look, and where does cohesion fit in? But also, what are the expectations of different levels. We've been talking very much about issues at a broad level, and I'd sort of like to bring things down now to the to places and turn to Jan Olbricht. First of all, I should have said right at the beginning, thank you very much for stepping in to replace Nadim Ahmad from OECD, who was in the agenda but had to withdraw at short notice. So my question to you is sort of how effective is cohesion policy at the urban level in terms of mobilizing growth and competitiveness of cities?
Yes, thank you, John. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this panel, even for replacing someone, but it's also the pleasure. But it's very interesting to be with non-politicians in the panel because they are very concrete and very going to the point. So as a politician, I have to keep the same line and not to answer the question you didn't ask. During 20 years in the parliament, we were fighting with my colleagues, among all the other things, about we are fighting for the European urban policy. This was one of our issues. That's why we thought that the urban policy is not marginal, is one of the basic elements, and is different. It's different than other policies. And of course, we observe very clearly the rural development policy, which exists. And all the time it is rejected to have the European urban policy. There was the one moment, I mean, a small light when the DG Regio changed the name and saying that it was DG Regio and urban policy. And of course we say, okay, all right, something is changing. But in fact, the reality was different. It was still all concentrated on the regional policy, which is okay. But the question is that the urban policy is in fact by definition, horizontal. I mean, this is not about money for cities only. This is about different things together. And the urban dimension, what you said, is in different European policies. And the main problems now appear in the cities, like social problems, disparities, environment, the question of pollution, migration. Everything is concentrated in cities. So, of course, not neglecting the importance of rural development. It's absolutely necessary to concentrate on our cities. That's why I think it's important that after so many years, what we heard from Commissioner Fito yesterday, that this is one of the elements of the new cohesion policy, to concentrate on the urban. And I'm very glad that Nicola Michalis from DG Regio will be responsible for preparing the urban agenda. This is very promising. But why it's promising? It's promising because we have to understand that either we treat cities like the beneficiaries of money, this is one of the beneficiaries, or we are really thinking about subsidiarity, and really we're thinking about the decentralization. Cities, and I know it as a former mayor and next to former president of the region, that the management of the region is completely different than management of the city. They are completely different ways of management. It's like, why? Because in the cities, I don't speak about the Chinese cities, multi-million. So no, we speak about European cities. In the city, the specificity is that this is integrated by definition. I mean, you cannot manage the city making silos. I mean, everything is linked. So, it's linked, like, for example, you have the question of transport, which is linked to the organizing of all the commercial centers, etc. And it's linked to the waste collection, and it's collected to the housing. Everything is linked. You cannot separate it. So this is a really very possibility for the cohesion policy. I mean, to propose something which is integrated approach, because the reality is integrated. So it gives a lot of possibility, but it requires the instrument. So that's why the first sign, like, for example, the urban initiative, was a very good sign to say, we will reward the integrated approach in the cities. But it's also important, and sorry to say that to the representatives of the regions, but we need decentralization on the regional level. I mean, the regions should have the trust to the cities. Because if not, we will observe, and we cannot hide it, the tension between cities and regions. they will blame regions for centralization of money. That's why I think working on is like working on big investment. This is different. Working on the regional management is different. But it's necessary to give to the cities the instrument to use it to the integrated activity, integrated approach. That's why I hope that the approach of Commissioner Fito gives the new light for this. Cities today is one of the key elements of the European policies. And I think we have to, that's why for the last 20 years, we were repeated in the parliament, housing is basic element for European policies. What was the answer? Never. Never. Why? Because housing is subsidiarity. It's up to the local. I mean, do it. It means when you translate it in European language, we will not give you money. It's your problem. What is now? Housing is now on the European priorities. We will have the Commission, because I still feel like the member of the Parliament, which I'm not, but we have the new committee for housing. This is completely different. The Commission is working now on housing. Because it's not about the just social policy. It's about a completely new challenge. That's why, when you ask me about the role, of the new cohesion policy, this is a new possibility, the new chance to create the cohesion policy, giving the possibility to the cities to use it on an integrated way. But for this, we need flexibility, we need stability, and of course, we need the possibility to give to the city authorities the possibility to create their own approach, which is integrated. It will be extremely difficult for the European Commission, because the European Commission is not prepared for any integrated approach at all. So because it's separate, sorry, Nicola, they are saying, but I observed it for many, many years. Each DG is fighting for it. Cities, urban is horizontal. It requires cooperation and coordination. I'm very glad that the coordination will be in the hands of the DG Regio, because someone should coordinate it. Let's hope and let's do everything all together to support it, because we should work on rural and cities. Last word. One of the elements which is completely neglected is the metropolitan areas. Metropolitan areas, which is a completely new situation when the cities were responsible to work with the surroundings, very often rural. And it's also important because this is not about big cities. When you say metropolitan, everyone says, oh, no. Metropolitan, they can manage, they are rich. Metropolitan areas is about the complementarity. So that's why I hope that the promises of Commissioner Fito, if he has the support from the other commissioners, is very, very important for all of us. And I hope that regional authorities will support urban.
Thank you very much. The point you made about the need for a distinctive approach for urban areas, I think it's really well made. It's been one of the particularly interesting aspects of the territorial dimension over the last 2 decades, and particularly, thinking about the urban dimension at the level of the city regions, the sort of metropolitan areas, at the level of neighborhoods, in terms of the sort of community focus, in terms of the issue of small towns, which have been really suffering. And there's a whole range of interesting initiatives, as you said, in terms of sustainable urban development, ITIs, CLLDs, and so on. And be interesting, particularly in the context of the emphasis placed on affordable housing that we heard about yesterday, and that you've mentioned, how that evolves. So, last but not least, can I turn to Andres Rodriguez-Pose? Now, we've heard a lot about the sort of policy issues, the policy challenges from a policymaker perspective, governance challenges, and in the context of the reform debates. If you try to stand back a little bit, as you have done in your work, how do you see, in the face of these challenges, these mega trends, how do you see development policies contributing, particularly cohesion policy?
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for having me here. Thanks to all for being here. And as John said, I'm the only academic in the panel. I hope I'm not just going to go in a completely different direction. But let me start by where your minister, your Secretary of State, your Marshal started, we are living in a Europe that is facing probably the biggest challenges, not in a generation, I would say in probably 2 or 3 generations. We are living in a Europe that is facing a massive competitiveness challenge, and in that we are a diminished Europe. Just in the year 2000, Europe represented 1/4 of the economy of the world. Today, we represent 16%. So we should expect some decline, but this is a massive decline in 1/4 of a century. We are in a Europe that has witnessed virtually no growth in productivity for the last 3 decades. I mean, there are countries, and Poland is one, where there has been some improvement, but most of the rest of Europe is stagnant in terms of productivity. We're facing a climate emergency. All the information, all the data, and there's no need to just turn saying last year was the warmest year in history since we have records. But also the flash floods, the droughts, the fires that were mentioned are creating significant challenges. We're facing a problem of adapting to a new world in which digital transformations, AI, automation is creating risks and opportunities as well for the labor market. And we are in a Europe, as was said by your Secretary of State, that is facing massive security challenges. We have the biggest war we have had since the Second World War right on the borders of the European Union. And let's not sugarcoat this. If the problems are growing, it's also because we are a diminished Europe. We are weaker from an economic perspective, and we are weaker as a result from a social and a political perspective. Our capacity to act as a beacon, as a lighthouse, as a guide for the rest of the world is diminished, and we are actually struggling to fulfill our challenges. Having said that, the European Union is adopting the right type of action. It's having big discussions about what are we going to do to improve competitiveness, to make a single market that works, to increase security, to deal with the twin transitions, all the transitions, the digital, the green, the demographic transitions that we are facing. And we are adopting the right measures. So we have a thrust, we have the wind in our sails, political, helping us to go in the right direction. But also, we have to bear in mind one thing, that many of the policies that are well-intentioned are not going to be socially and territorially neutral. If we go for trying to, as the Draghi report says, trying to emulate the United States, compete where we are lagging behind or where we need to compete, that is going to mean massive investment, but massive investment not going, I'm sorry to say that, to Malopolskie, not going to most parts of Europe, but already being concentrated in the most prosperous and most dynamic areas of Europe. If we go for a green transition, which is going to be highly intensive in capital, but relatively extensive in terms of new jobs and employment generation, most of the research and innovation is going to take place in already dynamic places, and many of the areas that depend not just on, let's say, clean energy, brown energies, but also on sectors that rely on transportation, on intensive agriculture, are going to suffer. They're going to have a difficult transition. And the digital transition is going to have the same effects. So what's likely to happen if we don't have a broader discussion that involves what are the implications of the policies that we're going to do, that first we're going to have a concentration of investment in places that are already dynamic, and many other places that are already vulnerable because they are suffering from all these challenges together are going to suffer more. That creates 2 types of problems. On the one hand, we have an economic problem because we are assuming that growth can only come from the most dynamic poles of the European Union, and we want dynamic cities in Europe. We want our Parises and our Munichs and the Randstad in the Netherlands to do very well. But we also want Krakow to be a pole of economic development. And we want Cluj. And we want also rural areas in Bulgaria or in Greece to have potential. Because these are places that have significant potential. And if we take a look at what has happened in Europe, many of the big breakthroughs that we have had have not come from the usual suspects. The biggest breakthrough that Europe has had in recent years is the vaccine, and it came from BioNTech, a spin-off of the University of Mainz, which was not the expected place where it was going to take place. We have the biggest pharma companies in places like Paris, for example, in southern Germany. Yet, the biggest star right now is Novo Nordisk, coming from Copenhagen. Not a small place, but nevertheless, not the usual suspect. So we got potential everywhere, and if we don't use that potential because we disregard it, we're going to have a Europe that is less capable of facing those challenges. And also, the second challenge is the social and political one. Your Secretary of State mentioned before the whole idea that we cannot leave people behind. Just putting all the emphasis on policies that would concentrate economic activity in the hope that this is going to spread, first, that's not going to happen, and it's going to create massive social problems that then become translated into political problems. Last year was the worst year for the European Union by quite some margin in terms of the growth of Euroscepticism. Europeans in national elections last year voted for 1/3 of Europeans, for parties that want either the demise of the European Union or a profound reform of the European Union, including things like the supremacy of the European legislation over national legislation or the euro. So, and if we have that sort of situation, and we need to just watch what has happened in the United States, we end up that we will have no greater competitiveness, no green transition, no digital transition, and our position will be diminished. So here comes cohesion policy. We need cohesion policy to permeate all these debates. Because, let me just take one of the transitions, the green transition. If we go for a green transition, the way we're doing it with just a just transition fund for places that actually are the ones that currently depend on mines. And as a compensation policy, we're going to be dealing with the tip of the iceberg. Unlike the Titanic, we're going to sink. We need to make sure that, because all indicators show that the highest vulnerability to the green transition comes from places that are behind and places that are highly vulnerable already, that we address those problems in order to make sure that we will have not just a more cohesive Europe and a more dynamic Europe, but also that we will have a green transition and we'll be able to deal with one of the most existential problems that we're facing as humankind. So we need to bring cohesion into the fray in all these debates because, as I said before, without cohesion and greater cohesion, there's no green transition, there's no digital transition, there's no demographic transition, there's no more competitiveness, there's no greater productivity, there's no greater security. But what type of cohesion? And Mercedes has said it at the beginning, and also your deputy marshal, or your marshal has said it at the beginning. We have been using increasingly cohesion as a basket to compensate. It's considered as compensation, and it's considered as a policy to deal with emergencies. And cohesion policy should not be that. It should be a policy for promoting development, what it was first and foremost. Because if we promote development and we use cohesion mainly to leave no stone unturned, to look for potential in Europe where there is, and let's not kid ourselves about that, there's potential everywhere in Europe. Places that until relatively recently were motors of economic development have not become overnight laggards. They have potential that is latent and needs to be used. But we need to move it, to keep it turned, in order to make, first, one Europe that is far more dynamic and competitiveness, one Europe that can face the challenges that we're facing in a far more comprehensive and united way that we are doing, and one Europe that can reassert its place in the world and compensate for the wasted time that we have had over the last 2 decades or 2 decades and a half. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andres, for sort of crystallizing the challenge before us. On the one hand, we have these major issues that you've outlined that face the EU, that in terms of its potential weakness, the fact that the diagnoses are essentially right in terms of what we need to focus on in terms of innovation, decarbonization, security, and so on. But the question is how those policies will be implemented, and as you said, how to bring cohesion into the frame. And it seems to me that's the big challenge, particularly at this present time of the Polish EU presidency. It ensures that there are voices that are saying the responses are not territorially neutral, and that we will potentially widen disparities and increase concentration. And crucially, as you said, ignore potential in regions outside the core areas. Okay, a lot of interesting points made by our panelists, and thank you very much to each of them. And I hope that you've been submitting your questions on Menti and your thoughts. I think what we want to do now is give you an opportunity to give your views on some of the potential policy responses. As I said at the start, we are using Menti to pose 3 sets of questions relating to the policy and governance challenges faced by policymakers. So each of the questions that we put up on screen will have a series of options, and we'd like you to give them a score from 0 to 10, where 0 is the lowest value and 10 is the highest value. Now you can see the first of the questions on screen. Which of the following solutions do you feel could strengthen the territorial dimension of EU policies? What do you think about territorial diagnosis as an obligatory requirement? Special measures dedicated to different territories in every public policy? Coordination mechanisms of interventions? Integrated different instruments under EU policies? Territorially oriented instruments in various policies, or territorial impact assessment, TIA, of EU policies. What do you think of each of these solutions? Give them a score of between 0 and 10. Okay, we're seeing reasonably balanced response to each of these so far. What have we got in the lead? Territorial diagnosis, territorially oriented instruments. Wow, okay. We're not getting huge selectivity here. Okay, interesting. Interesting suggestion that across the board there is support for each of these policy responses, these solutions to strengthen the territorial dimension of EU policies. Okay, good. I think that's given us an interesting set of responses. I thought we might get some stronger views for particular policy measures, but it looks like that there is a toolbox approach from our audience, viewing that we should be looking, or we should have in our toolbox a variety of these kind of solutions. Okay, thanks very much for your responses to that question. Let's go on to the second question. In an EU strategic framework and budget which is focused on competitiveness, which is what we are hearing, how can the territorial contribution of cohesion policy be maximized? We might find ourselves, as Nicola de Michaelis said, in quite a different situation following the next MFF. So what do you think we should be doing, or policymakers should be doing, to maximize the possible contribution of cohesion policy? Minimum shares of program spending, regional competitiveness strategies to underpin programming, interregional cooperation on innovation to be an integral part of programming, which was recommended, I think, in the Draghi report and in the high-level group on the future of cohesion policy, and potentially joint territorial initiatives together with EU competitiveness policies as part of sort of sectoral action plans. We're seeing this to a certain extent in terms of what's happening under R&D, EU R&D policies, but not really in terms of a coherent approach. So what do we have here so far? We have fairly strong support for joint territorial initiatives together with other EU policies for competitiveness. Now, this is thinking about a possible EU competitiveness fund that has been heralded in some of the policy statements and documents. Interesting also support for, if you like, mainstreaming interregional cooperation on innovation to make it a much more integral part of programming. And what we've seen so far is that interregional cooperation is sometimes sort of works in a sort of parallel universe. Slightly less support for regional competitive strategies, and less support, I think, for minimum shares of program spending focused on key EU priorities. We've had some experience of this, of course, in the last two program periods with sort of thresholds, earmarking, and so on. So some interesting responses there. Let's move on then to our third question, which is focused on improving the future territorial governance of cohesion policy. What do you think about the importance of ensuring the continuation of regional programs? This is one of the areas that one of these aspects may be at risk if there is a more sort of national plan, more centralized approach in future. Encouraging a minimum share of national allocations to be spent through subnational authorities. Strengthening the involvement of local authorities. We've heard that the regional level isn't always the right level. Expanding the use of territorial instruments. As I said, we have a lot of experience with integrated territorial investments in terms of community-led local development and so on. And lastly, ensuring the continuation of direct engagement between regional authorities and the Commission. And this is something that may change if there is a much more a stronger focus on Commission engaging with member states at the national level through national plans. So we've got strong support for ensuring the continuation of regional programs. Very strong support. I think it was one of the strongest sets of responses that we've had to the three questions. Also, strengthening involvement of local authorities, I think also interesting. And along with that, ensuring the continuation of direct engagement between regional authorities and the Commission. Okay, thank you very much for those responses. I hope that's given you some sort of food for thought in terms of the kind of policy questions, policy dilemmas, governance questions that will potentially face us going forward. We did ask for questions, and here is a selection of those that we've got from our colleagues who have been collating the questions. So what have we got? This is putting a strain on my eyesight here. Let me just turn around. So the territorial approach is not only about regions, but about functional areas and metropolises. Is this understood? And when will it be reflected in an adequate way in cohesion policy? What do you think of the territorial impact of the competitiveness compass? Should the rural development policy be more closely linked to cohesion policy? How do you see the ITI instrument evolving? Yes, cohesion policy and short-term crises. And the trade-off between efficiency, effectiveness, equity in the design of future cohesion policy. And a specific question for the Minister, sharing your vision for sources of energy in Poland from now. Okay, a lot of interesting questions there. Can I maybe turn to individual panelists to sort of pick out, to respond to some of these questions. You've got quite a broad responsibility for EU funds, Ms. Caballero, and I wonder how you'd see rural development developing in the future, and particularly its relationship to cohesion policy. Minister Foresta, I think there's a question specifically for you in terms of the longer term, if you like, extending what you were saying at the start. How do you see the energy transition being managed in terms of both dimensions of policy that you mentioned? Jan Olbricht, could you maybe comment on the first question there about sort of to what extent, you started to touch on this towards the end, about you felt that we needed to develop, to strengthen the way we approach the urban dimension. Nicola de Michaelis, I'm sure you're one of the people who's read the competitiveness compass very closely, and I wonder how you see, what you see as the potential territorial implications of the competitiveness compass. And Andres, could you maybe address the question about tackling the trade-offs between efficiency, equity in the design of future cohesion policy and other EU policies? This was very much the kind of point you're making at the start, but perhaps you could develop that a bit further. So, can I give the floor to you, Ms. Caballero?
Thank you so much. Well, I agree with the proposal, and we try to do as much as possible. Indeed, rural development traditionally has been a support to groups that are based in the rural area and for investment, for example, to channelize water or things like that. But in some investment, for example, we say in Spanish, if it is down, what we call in baja, in down, then it is rural fund, but if it is bigger, but in the same kind of investment, then is ERDF. Is this useful? It is, but I think that the approach should be different, and I'm referring to what Jan Albrecht was saying before. With Objective 5, and thanks to the cooperation of the Commission, we have a different approach in the call for proposal we do for all the urban areas. And we talk about urban, rural areas. I mean, for example, just depend on the composition of the categories of population in a country, we can have, as it is our case, more of 95% of municipalities in Spain are less than 2,000 inhabitants. And then if you want to bring cohesion to them, you need an approach, rural, more rural development fund, but also cohesion policy, ERDF. Why? Because we always think that even if they live in a rural area, that does not mean they want urban services. That's completely different. Maybe they work in agriculture, but this does not mean that they do not want urban services. Digital, health, many others, transport, and for that, rural funds are not thought. This is different. So we had to think in a more developed approach, honestly thinking of rural-urban areas. And for that, for example, the cooperation with the Commission in some specific provinces, we have created areas of 10,000 inhabitants with a head of the area of 5,000, because we didn't have more. I mean, the size of the village was not more than that. And with this cooperation, we are going to promote this kind of services, not thinking only of the rural approach, but to the urban services in an agriculture, rural, traditional area. And I think this, we are going to see the result, but we are quite confident that this is the approach, and well, it has been very well received there in Spain among the municipalities, and now we have 1,800 million to that also, of course, for big towns, but the specificity of the problem is different. But we were thinking of how to cover the whole territory, bringing cohesion policy to them. Otherwise, they were just putting aside and only with the traditional rural fund approach. And I think that the future is different.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, we talk a lot about policy coherence and coordination, but we've got two territorial policies and we're missing out on the interrelationships, as you said, but also in terms of policy and coherence. Thank you very much. Minister Ballester.
Thanks. So first I'll tackle the question that was directed to me. So the vision for sources of energy in Poland 10, 20 and 50 years from now. So 10 years from now, around 35, this is in line with the National Energy and Climate Plan we are preparing. So I think we are in a safest territory in terms of where we want to be. And this will be roughly 70% of energy coming from zero carbon sources. 20 years from now, 45, I will round up to 2050. This is where the EU needs to reach carbon neutrality. So this means for energy sector in Poland to be at least carbon neutral, if not carbon negative. Because if you look at the carbon negative target for Europe, it means that some sectors of the economy will need to move faster and try to compensate for sectors that cannot decarbonize at all, like some elements of agriculture or transport. So the power sector needs to become carbon negative. But I think Polish sector will be carbon neutral in 2050. 50 years from now, my God, give me a crystal ball. I don't know. Carbon negative, but with new technologies coming in, new thermonuclear. Hopefully, we'll finally get something of our EU spending on Kardash and the accelerator. But I also wanted to try to tackle the last question, because it's quite interesting in terms of recommendations for the future programming. I see that from my perspective, and I will disagree with Jan here, because in my topics the focus should not be certainly on urban areas, because where we decarbonizing, where we going through an energy transition, I'm not worried about urban areas. They'll be fine. They can handle it. And all the technologies and all the business models we already have today to make technologies in transition profitable when you have high density of population, where you have capital swirling around, when you have brain power, and urban areas are perfect you have perfect storm for energy transition. I'm worried for less affluent areas, non-urban, and there I would say that cohesion policy is needed for transport transition, for heating transition, individual homes, individual transport, and that's the first kind of area for cohesion policy to have a kick in. Grid expansion. This is a sort of the blood system for the future of energy transition. You need grid, you need infrastructure, because decarbonization or energy transition means electrifying of everything that is possible, and for that you need grid. And it makes money if you expand grid in urban areas, but it's very difficult to expand grid in rural areas where you need kilometers of cables. And I would say competitiveness and new industries, this is for urban areas, and I agree that this is something that we need to work at different places in Europe, because they all have potential, but possibly will not see new technologies emerging from rural areas, but rather urban. And last point I would like to make is that just transition, for me, is basically the different side of, second side of the same coin, which is the cohesion policy. Because cohesion is basically helping people with just transition. It's something that is, we treat just transition today as helping some selected areas, as you pointed out, the tip of the iceberg. But for me, just transition is not only coal, is all manufacturing that is legacy industries, is car industries, chemical industries, refining, but also helping people in rural areas to adapt to the new reality. It's behavioral change. Energy transition is a behavioral change, so cohesion policy should also try to address that issue. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much. I think you were agreeing with Andres Rodriguez-Posé's point about the relatively small attention that we're paying through the Just Transition Fund to the Just Transition is inadequate. So are you recommending that that just transition is, if you like, horizontal or integral to the next cohesion policy?
I think we give too much. It's not detached priority. I think for me, just transition is an element of cohesion, of becoming more cohesive. These areas need help, of course, but it's about cohesion policy. It's not something. I also don't like naming different kinds of or shades of poverty, like energy poverty, transport poverty. No, it's all poverty. We need to address it. We have different tools in different policies, but it's all poverty. It's same with just transition. For me, it's element of cohesion policy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jan Albrecht, can we turn to you?
Yes, now I will switch to my comment because as a politician. My neighbor presented a typical European way of life, like cities they can manage. Oh, congratulations. But in this time of extreme urbanization, and this is extremely difficult, more and more difficult. And when you take just energy, right, I mean, and the infrastructure, but you take the energy to urban transport, to housing, I mean, this is makes
responsible for energy and climate. So that's why this is my take.
It's okay. It's easier. But anyway, it's just one. But okay, before answering my question, I think it's also. The problem, the cohesion is not only the problem of cohesion policy. The cohesion is the problem of different policies. So what we will face will be a real debate how we understand really one of the policy which is concentrated on the cohesion, whereas all the other policies are also, they have to take into account the question of cohesion, territorial, social, etc. So this is one. Why I'm saying it? Because this is a very typical problem with the rural. I'm in the generation of dinosaurs, so I remember in Salzburg, there were, maybe John, you remember the meeting of different commissioners, and that time Commissioner Barnier. They came to Salzburg and they declared that now this is the time to separate rural development from cohesion policy. Why they did it? Because they were afraid that cohesion policy will go down, and they were afraid that the rural problem will go down with the cohesion policy. So they separate rural development from cohesion policy. What happened? It means what happened is the rural development, which is exactly about cohesion. Rural development is about the cohesion. Now, it became a kind of reservoir for the agri-production. So this is a very famous modulation. It means that if there is not enough money for direct payment, you can take it from the rural development. So, okay, but this is absolutely a mistake, because rural development is a clear element of the cohesion policy. What we were trying to do, following the German idea of a link between urban and rural, the Germans, they presented the idea of German cities, Ruben. We created the initiative Urban. We even give the money to OECD to prepare the report between rural and urban, proposing the Commission to create a special fund for rural-urban cooperation. No result. Why? Because the ministers in different member states, they were defending their own policies. The commissioners were defending their own money. So they say, no way. You have cohesion money, rural development money, no possibility. Now with the objective 5, it's a little bit easier. I hope it will work. I think that rural development is exactly the element of cohesion policy. We should save it, because if not, it will be reduced like the cohesion policy has been reduced last years for different elements, what Jacek Protas explained before. When we speak about the territorial approach, of course the territorial approach is about territories. So if it's about territories, be careful. Territories is not always authorities. It's not always authorities. Territories meaning, for example, NATS 2 is not about the regional authorities, it's about territory. The question who can make the policy concentrate on the territory. The policy can be made by the government and by the regional on the territories. It's not the question of the regional policy is not about the competences of regional authorities. The question is, what is the role and how we can organize the policy, giving the regional authorities the possibility to decide. But this is not everything for the territorial, because territorial meaning it comes from different policies, different money, etc. So that's why when we speak about the questions about the functional areas, of course, the question is to understand what is the instrument, what is the best way. As I said, when we use the terminology metropolis, it will be exactly the opposition. And it will be exactly, I will use your expression, they will manage. Because metropolis are rich. No, but I think when we speak about the metropolitan areas, it is about the element of link, complementarity, different functions, etc. And this is absolutely necessary. And I hope the question is when it will finally be reflected. The discussion has just begun. And we have to have it in the regulation for the next years. It's absolutely necessary to also to propose some kind of, like it was very famous, 5% or 8%, to have a kind of ring fencing. Ring fencing saying this part of money should be for this kind of elements. It's also reducing a little bit the freedom, but of course it's necessary to do it. That's why I hope that in the next regulation we will find on not only the urban initiative, but also the element of urban areas, reading the metropolitan areas. Which is, of course, giving the light to the cooperation between the cities and surroundings, and, of course, answering the question like, for example, the energy support for the territories around cities, which very often are neglected. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple of really interesting points there. I mean, one is the point that you started to develop towards the end there, a more sort of flexible approach to territory and thinking quite sort of differently. Also networks, sort of relationships between cities and so on. It'll be interesting to see the ex post evaluation of these territorial instruments that we've been experimenting with over the last period, and what can we learn from that for the future. But the other bigger point that you're making, which also runs through the report of the high-level group on cohesion policy, is that cohesion is not just about
just one comment. I can give you a very good example from the Polish case. When I was about the urban dimension and the other dimensions, and territorial dimension, when I became the marshal, it means, we mixed the marshals president of the region, I remember the first approach to the regional contract. And of course, what we asked the government at the time is, please give us the territorial regional dimension of different policies in different ministers to create the roadmap. The answer of all ministers, it was after the changes, it was our government, new democratic government. The answer of the ministers, nothing. None of the ministers saw any regional dimension in any of the policies. So the result was zero. And this just began another discussion. Sorry for interrupting, but I think it's about territorial approach.
No, this is really a really important issue. So often, regional policies, cohesion policy, are seen as a pot of money. That's what we need to do. That's what we use in order to deal with cohesion challenges. When cohesion challenges are really relevant for virtually every policy. That links very nicely with the question here about the competitiveness compass. And Nicola, perhaps you'd like to reflect on that question.
Look, I have no clue what the territorial impact of the competitiveness compass can be. It seems that the compass has been written by somebody that has unshakable faith on market forces and on trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics whose effects are nowhere to be seen in the history of humanity, I think. And so Andres is right. We need to continue to argue that it's very difficult to imagine how the aggregate competitive position of the Union can be improved with millions of people, 50 million of people living in areas that are better, worse off than they were 10 years, 20 years ago, and 100 million of people living in areas that are stagnating, where public services are falling apart, where job opportunities are simply not there, where participation in labor markets is declining. On the other hand, I think that we also need to be a bit more self-critical on how cohesion policy operate. I have the luxury of dealing with the southern member states, and there are very significant things that are done through cohesion policy, but there are also things that probably should not happen. And those are the things that put the policy under the spotlight in Brussels, of those things that this money is not well used. We spend a lot of time discussing on shifting resources around because the things that we agreed are not functioning, and sometimes discussing very bizarre way in which the money is proposed to be spent. Let me just to give you an example. There are billions of euro allocated to support small and medium-sized enterprises. Well, a lot of that money is helicopter money. It's not very targeted. It's not very selective. It's not pushing SMEs to incorporate new technology. So I think that there is a bit of discussion to have on the design and the type of support that is given. We have smart specialization strategies that have been developed, and thanks God that they exist. This will force regions to think about the future, but at the same time, we haven't thought about how to link these regional strategies. Does it really make sense in a member state to have 15, 20 different regional innovation strategies without thinking about inter-regional linkages? This is one of the questions on the screen. We discuss on energy efficiency and in housing, and suddenly after a few years, there is no capacity. And Mercedes, you know that we disagree. I think that there is an administrative capacity problem. There is. Obviously, there is also, that problem is made worse by the fact that there are different instruments with different rules, but these problems were there before. The problem of getting to the end of the programming period, rushing to find way to spend resources. And I'm not saying that this is not a problem that other instruments face. But still, it's a problem that is perceived, and do not underestimate what perception of policies make in the way in which then the political discourse on the construction of the budget plays, how they play in that conversation. So I think that yes, we need to continue to make the case that competitiveness requires a regional dimension, attention to territorial specificity, attention to the fact that the impact of certain transition is different, has very asymmetric effects, but we also need to think, again, carefully on what we do with the funds that are at our disposal. Because, and I think that this is the issue that was raised yesterday about the midterm review. It's not that the midterm review will change anything, which will change everything, but it will help to send a signal that the policy can be responsive to new agenda, with maintaining the territorial dimension. So yes, it can serve the competitiveness agenda, but then we need to follow up with the investment that are able to prove that we're moving in that direction. And I'm not sure that we went, till the end of that reflection. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I think it's something that came up yesterday as well. Is the difference between the perception and understanding of cohesion policy in this room and in the cohesion policy world, and the perception in Brussels, in the SecGen in terms of DG budget, and around the Commission President. Lastly, Andres, could you stand back again and reflect on this bigger question, which runs through, I think, of the number of the observations made here? Okay, so I'm going to deal with the one you highlighted for me, which is the trade-off between efficiency and equity. And I'm going to answer taking account of my origins. I am Galician, not Galician from this part of Europe, but Galician from the western part of Europe. And we Galicians from the western part of Europe, we are the ones who, when you meet on a flight of stairs, you don't know whether they're going up or down. So they are also the people that always answer a question with another question. So my answer to this one is this really a trade-off? Because in my view, there's no trade-off. You cannot have a policy that targets efficiency without achieving or looking into equity, and you cannot have a policy that targets equity without looking at efficiency. If you do it, both policies are bound to fail, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. Policies that target fundamentally equity are policies that by stealth become social policies. And because they are social policies, and social policies are very necessary, but we don't need social policies that are social policies by stealth. And as a result of that, they are bound to become just compensation policies that do not work. And the problem is that it's not the real situation, but for long, many people, including many people within the European Union and the European Commission, have considered that cohesion policy was not a development policy, but a social policy by stealth. And therefore, highly vulnerable and the first target when things go wrong. So let's go for policies that tackle efficiency. But here the idea is, and the logic is very clear, if we get greater efficiency, let's say we make the cake bigger, more people can eat from that cake. But the problem is when we go for efficiency, we might not, if you're a cook like me, your cake is not going to grow, so it's going to be small. But if you're a good cook, the cake is going to be bigger. The problem is that what we're seeing is that not everyone eats more, but really very few eat a lot and become fat, and the rest are looking at the others eating, creating not just problems of development, but also resentment and discontent. And this is what has been happening in many parts of the world, where we're seeing concentration of economic activity in certain places. And that would not necessarily be bad if we had these so-called automatic stabilizers that would work. What are the automatic stabilizers? The diffusion of opportunities, the diffusion of economic activity from the dynamic centers to the rest. Well, what we're seeing in Europe and in other parts of the world is that very dynamic places,
actually attract significant resources. They suck resources from big distances. In Europe, we have measured that the attraction of cities like Paris can be felt 1,000 kilometers away. But when it comes to diffusion, we go to a maximum of 200, 250 kilometers. So very little. So if you're in Paris, you attract resources from all over France, and then you get barely to Tours or to Orléans or to Poitiers. And that creates a problem, because it leads to an ever-growing concentration. The second is the whole idea of migration. So if there are no opportunities in remote areas, in vulnerable areas, in industrial declining areas, these people can move to the cores, to the dynamic areas where there's opportunity. But first, there's not opportunity for all in the dynamic areas. And why should I have to move when there's significant potential in my place? I don't want to move, or I might not have the potential to move, or if I can move, what am I going to do in Paris when, for example, with the money that I have in some part of, let's say, Podkarpackie region, I can buy a massive house, and that would buy me a cupboard in Paris, or in Warsaw, for that sake. So that creates a lot of other problems, and mobility is becoming far more restrained. It's not the solution. And then the final thing is that, hey, wait on a minute. Not always the dynamic places, the big cities, are the ones that grow. We have a lot of them that grow, and they have grown swimmingly in Europe. Warsaw has done very well, as many of the capital cities of post-2004 members. Places like Bratislava, or places like Prague, or Bucharest, or Tallinn, or Riga, etc., they have done really, really well. But not all big cities in Europe have done well in that period. Lisbon, Rome, Vienna, to a certain extent Berlin, have been lagging behind their countries and the dynamism of their countries. And of course, when we look at the dynamism of Europe and where wealth is produced, we have 1/3 of our wealth comes from the biggest cities. And that's good, and we want to have dynamic big cities. I'm with you, Jan, here. But that means that 2/3 comes from medium-sized cities, smaller cities, towns, and rural areas. And many of these have problems, but some of the most dynamic parts of Europe are intermediate cities, medium-sized cities, and smaller cities. And they also deserve attention. So we need to have this territorial dimension. But in order to do that, and your secretary said at the beginning, we need to invest not just on specific areas. We need a territorial dimension that covers all areas. Because opportunities would happen. We need to continue investing in the places that are less developed, in the places lagging behind. But we have done very, very little for places that have been in decline. So should we wait for the 60 million people that live in regions in Europe that are now, as Nicola was saying, with levels of development of GDP per capita that are below, in real terms, those that we had in the year 2000, to reach the levels of development of Calabria, for example, or let's say the northeast of Romania, the Moldova region in Romania, to get support, or should we intervene now? And also, I think Jan was saying, within our big cities, many of them are very dynamic, but we have significant pockets of lack of opportunities and prosperity. We always highlight Paris as one of the most dynamic places in Europe, but go and tell that to anyone who lives in the northern, northeastern, and eastern suburbs of the city, and they will say, yes, we might be rich, but I see nothing of that. I've been long-term unemployed, and my prospects are very limited. So we need a policy that is far more flexible, far better targeted, far more incisive, that is a cohesion policy, than it has been until now, to achieve the mutually common objectives of equity and efficiency in order to achieve greater development and competitiveness.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andres. That's a very nice point at which to end in sort of summarizing the challenge that lies before us. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, or we have run out of time. We've covered an enormous range, enormous ground in this session in terms of understanding the magnitude of the challenges, using the example of decarbonization in Poland, the journey that lies ahead and the implications of that. We were reminded right at the start about how the importance of cohesion as part of the European integration process, as the letter report stated very, very clearly, and the importance of solidarity for the reasons that Andres talked about just now. The importance of regions and cities, the subnational level, in terms of responding in a place-based way to what the issues are, what the challenges are. The cohesion policy has a record of success in terms of convergence and in terms of what it has done for places, but as we were reminded, it is far from perfect, and the need for humility in reflecting on what needs to be improved. We've heard about what is needed in terms of regions, in terms of cities, and we've been reminded of the political debate that lies ahead. We will have some first indications, I think, probably this week of how the MFF will be reshaped, and so it's going to be a tough ask, but an important ask. Particularly of this presidency, but in terms of the wider cohesion policy community, to ensure that the issues of cohesion are brought into the frame, as Nicola said. So I hope you found this session to be interesting and informative. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions to the Menti questions, but also in terms of the ranking of the policy solutions. I think that's provided a lot of food for thought that I hope can be picked up in the parallel sessions that lie ahead for the rest of today. I'd like to thank each of our panelists for their really excellent contributions, Mr. Caballero, Mr. Bolester, Mr. De Michaelis, Mr. Jan Olbricht, and Professor Rodriguez Posey. And thank you to all of you for your engagement in the session. Could I ask you to join me in giving our panelists and also the organizers of this session a round of applause?
And of course to our moderator, Professor John Bachtler. Thanks to all of you for the wonderful discussion. Teraz zaproszę Państwa na...
And now we're going to have a coffee break until 11:45, and then we are starting our parallel sessions in accordance with our agenda. You can see it in front of you as to effective implementation of the cohesion policy, lessons learned and recommendations for the future. S3A, territorial dimension of the cohesion policy. S3B, green industrial policy as a tool for building cohesion. S4A, think Europe, do Interreg. S4B, non-tangible benefits from the implementation of the cohesion policy. We meet here in this room at 2:15 for the final summing up panel discussion. Let me remind you that within this final panel, we will be speaking English here, but one of the speakers is going to speak French, so it might be useful to have your headphones ready. Thank you very much. See you later.